Let me share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to do two questions, like always, before class starts, and then I will go into today's topic, which will be higher order functions one. And I'll get into that a little later. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to rip off the band-aid and we're going to do MySplice first. So MySplice is just like an annoying problem all around. It's just like really annoying to even think about. Sometimes like MySplice specifically, I feel like it's kind of easy like to figure out what you need to do, but just to get it all out like into your own code is just so annoying. You know what I mean? And I just hate problems like that. But this is good practice. So, const MySplice. Whoa, that is not how you spell splice. MySplice is going to be equal to a function. And this function is going to take a number of different things, right? So this function is going to take an array to start with. It's going to take a start index. It is going to take a delete count. And it is also going to take a new value, okay? So the new value will be put at the start index, and then after our new value is done, after that, we count how many things we delete based off of this number, put those things into an extra array, and then return that array, okay? However, we need to modify this array. These things that were deleted that are being returned cannot be in this original array. So this is pretty like annoying. You know, there's so many things to worry about. We're returning one thing but have to modify something else, you know, so it's kind of, you know, it's full of convoluted, but it's, you know, it's not too bad. So the first thing, however, the first thing that you should all be thinking about is, okay, well, we definitely need to return everything we're removing, right? So let's just automatically do let removed elements equal an empty array, right? Because this is the thing that we'll be returning at the end. And now we're going to want to also make another variable, because there is like kind of like a quick way to alter an array, whereas if you just take everything out of the array and then push things from another array into this one, right? So it's refreshing. Hold on. Oh geez, it's all gone. Well, I guess it's not the biggest deal. I didn't really do anything yet. REPL is the bane of my existence. Okay, I guess I'll just start over, whatever. So we do const MySplice, can be equal to a function, and it'll take an array, it'll take a start, it'll take a delete count, and it'll take a new value, right? So move this over a little bit. So basically we do const delete count, not delete count, const removed elements. It's going to be equal to an empty array. And then we'll do a const of kept elements, okay? And kept elements will also be an empty array. So everything that we're not deleting, I want to put into kept elements. Because at the very end, when we have everything where we need to be, like these two arrays, this one is going to represent what we'll be removing, and this is going to represent what we'll be keeping. So we're dealing with all of our elements, right? So then at the end, we'll pop everything out of array, and then we can loop through kept elements and push everything into array. And then we return removed elements. That's pretty much like the basis of what we'll be doing, right? So essentially, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a for loop. We're going to say for let I is going to be equal to 0. So we're going to start from 0, and we're going to do i's less than the start, and then I plus plus, okay? So then we do kept elements dot push array at I, okay? So basically, we know that if, let's say, our start index is at index 3, right? We know everything before index 3 is going to still be in array, right? So if we just loop from 0 and go until the start, then we know that we're putting everything that should be in the array already in there immediately to start. And if start is 0, then this for loop won't run because this condition won't be met, okay? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take everything from the beginning of the array up until the start and then put that into kept elements, okay? So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to check, because we don't always have to add a new element, but we do have to check, because if new value does exist, then we have to put that into kept elements, right? So we can do if new value is not equal to what? Undefined, right? Because undefined is the value of a parameter when there's nothing, when an argument isn't given, right? So if nobody passed in an argument to be held by new value, then new value would be undefined. But if it's not undefined, that means there is a value there, right? So we could just do kept elements dot push new value. Okay. So we did a lot of work right now, right? We did everything from the beginning up until the start, and then even the new value if that was there. But now, at the start, we are now deleting things from array, right? So what we can do is we could say another for loop. We could say for let I is going to be equal to start, because we're going to start at the start, right? Here we looped until the start, and now we're going to start at the start. And we're going to say I is less than, where do we stop? Okay? It's not delete count, because this is not like slice. This is not, delete count is not a stopping index, right? That's how many things we'll be deleting. So to get to the index spot of where we should actually stop, that would be start plus delete count, right? And then we could do I plus plus, like normal, okay? And now we can do removed elements dot push array at I. Okay? So now we start at our start index, go until the delete count has been met, right? And we'll put everything into removed elements. And now we can return removed elements, and we're done. Just kidding, we're not actually done. However, we do have now the thing that we need to return from the function, right? Splice returns a new array which was made here, of the things that we'll be deleting. And that happens in this for loop. So we're actually done with our return value. However, we're not done modifying our array, okay? We still have to modify the array. So if we went from the beginning up until the start index, and then we removed from the start index plus the delete count, what if we started at start index plus the delete count and go until the end and put that into kept elements too? Because after that delete count, then we still need everything in the array, right? So if we do another for loop and we say for let I equal to start plus delete count, and then we do I is less than array.length, and then we do I plus plus. Now we can do kept elements dot push of I, okay? So that will give us the end of the array. Now comes the tricky, weird part, okay? Now to actually get rid of, to actually mutate the array, you guys know all of these methods that actually do mutate the array, right? Besides splice, push, pop, shift, and unshift, right? So if we do while, this is like a quick way to get everything out of an array, while array dot length array dot pop, right? We don't actually care about the elements that are being popped. However, while the array dot length, so this statement has to be true, right? While this is true, truthy, we will continue to pop things out of the array. So does everyone agree that array dot length, whenever you dot length off an array, a number is returned, right? And the only falsy number, which will happen when this is done, the only falsy number is 0. So after we pop out that last element, the length will be 0, and then this array.length is no longer going to be truthy. 0 is not truthy. Every other number is truthy, but 0 is falsy. So we can actually break out of this while loop after that, and then we can do another for loop, right? So we can do for let I equal 0. And we do I is less than kept elements dot length. Well, then we do I plus plus. And now we can do now, since array is now empty, we could do array.push kept elements of I. We'll loop through kept elements and push every single thing that we're keeping back into array. So that whole array that was passed in here never got reassigned to something else, right? That array has always been the same. We mutated the whole thing by deleting everything here, and now using push, we are mutating it again by adding things. So now we return removed elements and splice is done. Any questions on my splice? Any questions on my splice? Was that a question? Or was that a TV? Nice. Thanks for participating, everybody. I love it. So now I guess we'll go into a deeper copy. So deeper copy, I thought isn't like too bad of a problem. So if we do const deeper copy, and that's going to be set equal to a function. So deeper copy has to take one array, okay? It takes the original array. And what we want to do is we want to return a copy of this array, what slice does. However, slice makes a shallow copy. So if this original array was not if this original array was holding another array inside of it, we also want to go into that inner array and copy that array too. We want to make a new array of that as well. Because if we just push a whole array into a copy array, then that reference gets pushed, right? So we're actually pushing that same inner array that's stored somewhere in memory, right? So the basic logic around this problem is to loop through original array, and when we find an array, we loop through that one as well, okay? And you only have to worry about 2 times, because this can go on forever. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to say const copy is going to equal an empty array, right? Because this is the thing that we're going to be returning, because we ultimately want to make a copy. And then we'll do our trusty for loop, and we'll say for let I equal 0, and we'll do I is less than original array dot length, and then we'll do I plus plus. And then we can say, okay, so now we have some options, right? So if it's just an element that's not an array, we could just push it into copy, right? However, if it is an array, we have to do some other stuff, okay? So we can say if array.isArray, and then we'll pass in original array at I, right? We'll check to see if this current element is an array. If it is an array, we will enter this if statement. Now we know that the current element, original array at I, is an array, right? So we can loop through original array of I, right? So we can say for let j equals 0, and we could say j is less than original array at I dot length. Because remember, original array of I is that inner array. Then we could do I plus plus, and then we can actually get in here and, oh wait, we actually have to make a inner copy, right? Because we don't actually want to push all of these individual elements into copy. We want to push them into a new array, okay?
So all of these elements that are in that inner array will be pushed into inner copy. Okay, so we'll push original array at I and then at j. Okay? Then, once we break out of that for loop, we can do copy dot push this entire array, inner copy. Okay? And then, after this if statement, we can put an else condition, right? Else copy dot push original array at I, because we know that it's not an array at this point. And then at the very end, we just return copy. Okay? So we check to see if the current element, which is original array of I, is an array. If it is an array, we define a new variable, inner copy, because we have to now make a copy of that inner array, right? So to make a copy of this outer array, we automatically did const copy here, right? But here, keep it consistent, we'll do here, we now found another inner array, so we have to make another copy of that. And that's what inner copy is doing. We push everything from that inner array into inner copy, and then we push inner copy into copy. And then, if this if statement isn't true, we skip over it and enter the else. Because if it's not an array, whatever it is, we're just going to want to push it into copy. Any questions on that? I feel like this one wasn't too bad, right? Okay. So, last week I feel was a little tough, right? So you guys learned about arrays. We went into objects. Objects are, I think, in my opinion, I don't, whatever you guys think, whatever. But my opinion is that objects are kind of easy. Okay, I think objects are super easy to work with, you know. But it is very, very new and different than like arrays and strings and things like that. So there's definitely a high learning curve in my opinion, but they're definitely easy to work with. Trust me on that. As you work with objects more and more, you'll get more used to them. Trust me. And then that whole reference and value stuff, that's a little confusing as well. But now you know why empty array is not triple equals to empty array, and likewise with objects, right? So now we're going to be starting one of our 2-day sections, right? Higher order functions. Today's lecture is going to be a little simple, in my opinion. There's not that much to go over. Tomorrow is going to be a little complicated, but I'm just going to throw in throw you guys some easy concepts to kind of wrap your head around. So, the whole concept of higher order function. What is a higher order function? What does that even mean? A higher order function is a function that either takes another function as a parameter, or argument, or returns a function. Okay? So if you write a function that returns a function, or you write a function that takes in another function as an argument, that function you wrote is a higher order function. And that's all that they are. And that's really the purpose of today's lecture. It's to kind of like explain how functions aren't really that different. Okay, they're not really that different from any other type of value. They're just another value in JavaScript, and you can do whatever you want with them. You can push them into arrays, as you saw in object methods. You can set them as values as an object in a key value pair, and you can throw them into other functions. So let me show you what I'm talking about, right? So let's say I have a function defined this way, and it's say hi, right? And what say hi does is we console.log yo. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to say function calls say hi. Okay? And what say hi is going to do, no, we're not going to call it that. We're going to say calls func. So what this function is going to do is it's going to take in something, a parameter that's func, and it's going to invoke that. So now, down here, if I say calls func and I pass in say hi, I get yo 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 yo, right? Because what I did, and then inside here, I will also console.log func. Like, what is that thing, right? It's a function with a name, say hi. And this is how a function will appear in your terminal, okay, with a name. So as you can see, we just take that and then we call it. So this function calls func is a higher order function, okay? Any questions on this?
I'm looking at this right now, and I see that function calls func has the argument of func and calls the log func here. So that is. I'm sorry. Explain how does the function calls func apply to the first function again?
Sure. So let's run through the whole page, right? So when JavaScript is going to run this whole page, we see a function definition and nothing happens. We see a function definition and nothing happens. Then we get to line 56 and we see a function that is being invoked, okay? So this is when JavaScript starts to run some of the code that you wrote, okay? Calls func is being called, and what we're passing into calls func is say hi. Say hi is this whole function. This whole function is being thrown into calls func, okay? So let's run calls func, right? When we run calls func, the first thing we do in calls func is we console.log func. What is func? Let's change this to arg, right? Arg is just an argument, okay? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to console.log arg. What is arg? Arg is function say hi. That's this whole thing. That's what we console.log, this whole entire function. So if arg is this whole entire function, can't we just invoke it inside of here, right? So when we're running calls func, the very last line is to run a completely different function, which is say hi. And that's why we see the yo 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 over here. Does that make sense?
I think I got it.
Like, we're just passing in this whole function into this function, and this function is going to call that function.
Okay.
That's it. It's not. Maybe you're thinking like a little bit too deeply into it, but it's really that it's that simple. We're just throwing a function into another one, and that other function is just going to call that function that was thrown inside. I just want to show you that this is like a possible thing that you all could do.
Okay.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, cool. So I said func before. That's very common. So like when you're writing your own functions, you know, like, and then like up here in my splice, right? This is the first parameter is just called array, right? I called it array, right? You usually do things like that so people can know what type of value this parameter is eventually going to be. Okay? So I usually like to say func. However, there is some some jargon I want you guys to be familiar with. So a function that is being put into another function is called a callback. And you're going to hear this term a lot. That's what everybody calls this thing. When you put a function into another one, the function that you threw into it is called a callback. So console.log callback, we get that function, and we invoke callback, and we get the yo yo yo. Any questions? Just some terminology. Okay. So now I'm going to show you.
So here, when you're saying when you put a function through another function, we're only doing that at line 56 when we're calling it.
Yeah, that's when we're actually putting that through the function.
Yeah.
Right?
So up until then, till 54, we're not putting it in. We're just writing two different functions.
Yes. We are just writing two different functions here, and then we are throwing one into another here. What
So
if I
that-
did?
Yeah, got it. Okay.
What if I did this? Right? This is just a string that's wrong. What if I threw in Brooke? What we console.log is the callback, right? Which is just a parameter. I could call this whatever I want. And that happens to be a string wrong. But then you can see here, you can see that we have an error. Type error, callback is not a function. Why is that throwing that? It's because on line 53, we are attempting to invoke something, right? You can only invoke functions. So as you can see, I by accidentally passed in a string. So you can't invoke strings. That's just going to throw a nasty, nasty error, okay?
Right. Okay, thank you.
So this only really works if I were to pass in another function.
Yeah, thanks.
Right. So just like, like functions are...
All right, so next steps.
So as you can see here, I have this array that I defined, and I just put in two functions in here. And I can loop through that array and console log each element like normal, and you see that they're just functions, right? So just in case I didn't call this function, I can say array at I, and I can invoke it like that. We're getting undefined here because I didn't actually pass in to anything, right? What if I passed in this? This still says yo, 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 but now this says yurt because over here, say hi is just console.logging yo, yo, yo. But over here, I'm console.logging whatever is being passed in. So if I just throw something into a function, and that function doesn't take it, doesn't take a parameter, nothing bad will happen, right? It's just going to ignore that. It's just going to ignore it. But now this string here can be captured inside of that callback parameter. However, that doesn't make any sense really because a callback should be a function, right? But I'm just showing you that you can loop through an array. That array can contain functions. You can call those functions inside of a for loop. You could console.log them. You can do whatever you want. Functions can be treated like any other value in JavaScript. You can pass them into functions, you can store them in arrays, and you can store them in values in a key value pair. That simple. Okay?
Okay.
Cool. So now I want to now I want to show you a very honestly, you're gonna think it's a little complicated, but it's actually not that hard to understand. It's another array method, okay? And this array method is called for each. Now, for each takes one argument and it returns nothing. That is what you need to understand about for each, okay? So let's say I have let array equal like 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? And now I say array, and then I have let copy equal an empty array. So let's say I wanted to make a copy of array. Instead of doing a for loop, I can actually do array dot for each, and then we're going to do some magic. So for each takes one thing. It takes a function. You have to pass in a function, okay? So I'm going to pass in, automatically, I'm going to pass in an anonymous function. Does everybody agree with me that what I am passing into for each is an anonymous function? Does this confuse you? I'm just passing in an anonymous function.
Not really.
Okay, now, what we're actually going to do is we're going to take certain things that for each passes into the function that we're defining, and we're going to use that to make our copy. So what are these things that for each passes into your function? It automatically passes in the current element, and then it also passes in the index. You don't really need to use the index in this situation. However, it's there if we need it, okay? Well, I'll show you. Console.log current is at index, right? And as you can see, 1 is at index 0, 2 is at index 1, yada, yada, yada. What for each actually does is it loops through the array you're calling off of automatically. It loops through it automatically, takes each element that's there and its index, and throws it into the function that you're writing. So the function that I wrote is just console.logging that current element and that current index, right? So instead of that, what if I was just to do copy.push current? Then I could console.log copy out here, and you should see copy is populated. Now, what does this return? I'm going to set a constant equal to array.forEach, right? So if I console.log current, what am I get undefined. It doesn't return anything. But what if I return in here? Nothing changes. Because what happens is, think about it. This function right here is being called 4 times, okay? And each time we're passing in a different element of array because that is what we're dotting off of. So we're calling that 4 times. Let's say the first element's 1, current is 1, we'll push it into copy, and then we'll return it to nothing. And then we'll call this function again. So that return element can't pop, since we're looping through something and calling this like a bunch of times, this value can't be stored anywhere. That's just not how it works. You can't, because if you loop through something 4 times and you call a function, and let's say that like every time, and that function returns something, but won't we get 4 different return values? You can't store 4 different values into one variable. So you can't actually return anything from this function. What it is really used for is to modify outside data, like we just did. It's kind of like a shortcut to writing a for loop. Because instead of like dealing with array of all this junk, we just do current, and as you can see, we don't even need the index. So we don't even need these parentheses. We just take current, we pass it in here, and then we just do copy.push. So we don't even need this return, we don't even need this, and we don't need, we don't need this. So what am I? And we don't need this. So this array.forEach, take the current arrow function. So this, because there's an arrow function, this is an ES6 way of writing a function. takes current. For each is going to throw in the current element for us. We don't have to do that. And what we're going to do is we're just going to take that current element and we're going to push it into copy every single time. Nothing is going to be returned from this. It's just going to modify copy, and that's all we want to do. Any questions on that?
Oh, I just want to make sure I'm not overthinking things.
Sure.
For each array, it's basically like taking a argument which is current and push it into.
Yeah. So you can think of, you know, like in a for loop, when you loop through an array and you have like array of I dot push into copy, like we do copy dot push array of I, the same thing is happening, right? Because instead of array at I, current is going to be. Because like when we're doing our own for loop, what we're actually doing is we're creating an I variable and we're making that I bigger every time, and we're using the fact that that thing is bigger every time to access each index in an array, right? So we're kind of like really manually, it's like really manually doing this. However, we don't have to keep track of I, we don't have to do any of that here in for each, because for each will take the current element and just give it to us in our function. What we do with that element is up to us. Cool? Any questions from anyone? All right. So let's get into some slides. So we'll just talk about why why functions are special, passing functions to other functions, which are called callbacks, and for each. That's all we're talking about for today. So functions aren't actually really special in JavaScript. We think of them as like different values because we use them to like return values and like build these big things that solve these problems and stuff like that. But they're actually not that different. We could put them in arrays, we could pass them into functions, whatever. Strings, numbers, and arrays, we're used to passing them into functions or returning them from functions, but functions sometimes seem like they're in a different category. But in JavaScript, functions are actually first-class objects, which is another way of saying that functions are like any other value in JavaScript. So like in this example, we have let amazing array, which is equal to an empty array. Then we have let happy string equal happy. So if we just push happy string into amazing array 3 times, what we get is an array with 3 strings in it, right? So what happens if we had this function called happy function, which is console.logs I am happy, right? Simple, easy to understand function. What if we did amazing array dot push that function 3 times, just like we did in the other page, right? We did happy string 3 times, right? But now we're doing happy function. What we get is an array with 3 functions in it. Nothing else could happen, okay? Because functions can be thrown around like any other value. How do we call all the functions in the array? How have we always looped through an array of values, right? So we do a for loop. We say let element equal amazing array of I, but that element is a function, so we can just invoke that element right there. And as you can see, we have I am happy 3 times. Any questions? So we know we can pass strings or any value into a function, right? Like we can just say logs a type, we pass in a string, then console.log type of value, we get a string, right? But if functions are like any other value, then we can pass functions into other functions too. Functions that take a function or return a function are called higher order functions. That's what they are. So as you can see, we have function logs a type value, console.log type of value. Then we have function happy function that just console.logs I'm happy like before, logs a type, and then we get function, okay? So the higher order function in this case is logs a type, because that's the thing that's taking a function. If we want happy function to run, we have to call it, right? we have function calls a function that takes a parameter that's called another function. And then what calls a function does is it just invokes another function. And then we have our happy function. Then we say calls a function and we pass in happy function. So we get I am happy because we threw happy function into calls a function. And what does calls a function do? It invokes that function that was its parameter, right? What was its parameter? Happy function. What does happy function do when we run? I am happy. Any questions on that? This was like pretty much my example, right? By all means, stop me if you're confused. Okay. So let's say calls with name. Function says hi, console.log hi name, right? So says hi takes a parameter name, and then when says hi is called, we console.log hi, and then that name, right? Then we have says bye, and it does the exact same thing, except now we console.log by name, right? So then I say function calls with name, and that's going to take a name, and it's going to take a callback. So if I say calls with name Sadie, and then says hi, and also calls with name Sadie says bye, let's walk through what's going to happen, right? On line 13, we will be invoking calls with name. We will pass in the string Sadie and pass in the function. This whole function says hi. So calls with a name. So name will be Sadie and callback will be says hi. What does it do? It just calls callback with name. So what we're doing is we're calling says hi with Sadie. Says hi takes a name and we console.log hi name. Hi Sadie, because we pass Sadie into the callback here. And the same thing happens with says bye. So as you can see, we see hi Sadie and bye Sadie in the terminal. Any questions? All right. So let's say I have a function add world, and it takes in a string, and it returns string, whatever that string is, plus space world, okay? And then I said calls with hello, which is a function that says return func, and we pass in hello. So on line 12, we do let result equal calls with hello, and then we pass in a function add world, okay? So what happens there? We run calls with hello, and we are returning func hello, right? We're returning func invoked with hello. So if we're returning this, we're returning a function invocation, that means we have to run this function before we actually get a return value. So what is func in this case? It's add world. And what is we passing into add world? Hello. So what does add world actually do is it returns hello, which is the string, with world. So that means if this returns hello world, then that means this is going to return hello world. So we can actually put that into a variable out here, and then we can see when we console.log result, we get hello world. Any questions on that? Okay. Here's another example. Say to all. So let's say we have a function, say to all, that takes in names and then say with name func. And then we will loop through names, and then we will call say with name func and pass in every single element into that into this callback, say with name func. So we have like group equal Jane, Jill, Pip, and Mike. Then we have our function say hello with name, and then we say hello name, right? So then when we call say to all and we pass in group, that means names up here will be this array group. And then say with name func will be say hello with name. So we will loop through group, and then we will call say hello with name with every single current element of that array. So we'll say hello Jane, hello Jill, hello Pip, hello Mike. Right? Any questions on how we got these in the terminal? Okay.
Why wouldn't you necessarily do this with two separate functions when you could just do a for loop for the names plus console logging like hello?
Well, you would never want to do this in the first place, right? Like
Yeah,
this is just
think
like
one-
this is just showing you
Mhm.
that there's different ways to do this. You wouldn't actually do this in like real life or anything like that.
Okay, yeah. I think that's kind of throwing me off. That like it just seems
Right.
kind of-
That throws a lot of people off, right? Because it's like, why would you ever care about doing something like this? The entire point to this lesson is to just show you that functions are like anything else. That's the whole point, okay? And that's what we dedicated an entire day of your time to like really solidify. Functions can be thrown into other functions. That's all we need to talk about, right? Because you're right. Like we would, if we just had an array and we needed to console everything out, we would just loop. Actually, I would use for each because that saves me time, right? So, yes, this is completely useless. I wouldn't use this practically anywhere. But I just wanted to show you that we are throwing now an array with a function into a different function. And that different function is calling that other function while looping through that array. There's a lot of different like loops you can go through, you know?
Gotcha.
Cool. And yes, you can pass in an anonymous function as well. So before, we had this function over here, say hello with name, right, on line 9. But here, we don't have that anymore. We are just passing in an entire function as the second argument for say to all. Okay? And it is doing the same thing. We still get by Jane, by Jill, by Pip, by Mike. Okay? So like you can pass in an anonymous function, or you can make that function outside and then throw it in elsewhere. Cool. Now we're going to talk about for each. So for each is a function passed into another function is often called a callback. And some built-in JavaScript features use callbacks, right? And the for each is an array method, and it accepts a callback as its only argument. For each calls the callback for each element in the array. When for each calls the callback, it passes the current element as the first argument of the callback. So what does that really mean, right? It's a little confusing, like when you think about it, but when you use it, it's actually surprisingly very easy, and you don't really have to write that much code. So like over here, we got Bridges, Brooklyn, Golden Gate, London, okay? We have function log uppercase string, which console.logs the whole string to uppercase, right? And then we just do bridges.forEach, and then we just pass in that function, log uppercase, okay? So what's going to happen? What did I just say in the previous slide, right? For each is going to loop through that array and pass in the current element each time to your function. What is your function? Log uppercase. That's your function. So every single time, we're going to pass in Brooklyn, then Golden Gate, then London into this function. And then we can see we get Brooklyn, Golden Gate, London all in uppercase because log uppercase ran each time. It ran 3 times. Any questions on how this is working? In my example, instead of writing log uppercase out here, I just did an anonymous function in here with an arrow. Any questions? Okay. The callback passed into for each also takes an optional second argument. For each passes the current index of the element as the second argument. So as you can see, now I'm not logging uppercase. Now the function is log with index, and it's going to take 2 things, string and IDX. Console.log string is at index IDX. Then we can see Brooklyn is at index 0, Golden Gate is at index 1, London is at index 2. So where is the string, why is that happening, right? Where is string and IDX coming from in this function over here? Where's that coming from? It's coming from for each. For each is just automatically going in order from start to finish through this array and passing in each element and its index into whatever function you pass into for each. And it's that simple. Any questions? And finite. So tomorrow we're going to be talking about returning functions from functions. Things are going to get a little confusing, okay? But for today, live it up and enjoy this workshop, all right?